The roar of engines shattered the quiet evening as a convoy of outlaw bikers thundered down a dusty highway. Their leather jackets bore menacing insignias, their laughter echoing with the kind of arrogance born from years of being untouchable. At the front of the pack was Duke, their leader, a towering figure with a menacing glare, the kind of man who commanded fear without uttering a single word. The group rolled into a small roadside diner, their presence immediately silencing the murmur of conversation inside. Seated at a corner booth was Agent Marcus Cole, an FBI agent on a discreet assignment. Marcus was a man of quiet strength, his every movement deliberate, his sharp eyes missing nothing. His polished leather shoes and neatly pressed suit made him stand out in the gritty, worn-out establishment. Yet it wasn't his attire that drew the bikers' attention. It was his composure. He wasn't intimidated by their loud entry or the tension they carried in their wake. He remained still, sipping his coffee, an unreadable expression on his face. The bikers, notorious for their volatile tempers and disdain for authority, weren't ones to let such indifference slide. Duke spotted Marcus immediately. Well, he drawled, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Looks like we've got ourselves a suit. Lost, are we?" Marcus didn't respond, his calm demeanor unwavering. He set his cup down gently, his movements so measured it almost seemed deliberate. His silence only provoked Duke further. The leader motioned to his crew, and they encircled Marcus like wolves scenting blood. "You deaf or just stupid?" One of the bikers sneered, slamming a hand on the table. Still, Marcus said nothing. His lack of reaction wasn't born of fear. It was the kind of restraint that came from knowing he was in complete control. But Duke wasn't a man to be ignored. He leaned down, his face inches from Marcus's. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" he hissed, sitting here all high and mighty like some big shot. Without warning, Duke slapped Marcus across the face, a loud crack that made the diner's other patrons gasp and shrink back in their seats. Marcus didn't flinch. Slowly, he turned his head back to face Duke, his expression as calm as ever. But his eyes told a different story. They were cold, calculating, and dangerous. For the first time, Duke hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "What's the matter, Suit? Got nothing to say?" Another biker jeered, emboldened by Duke's actions. They laughed, their mockery filling the diner, oblivious to the storm they were about to unleash. Marcus stood, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The room seemed to shrink around him as he straightened to his full height, his presence suddenly commanding. The laughter died down, replaced by a tense silence. "You've made a mistake," he said finally, his voice low but carrying an edge that sent a chill down the spines of those who heard it. Duke scoffed, masking his unease with bravado. "And what are you gonna do about it, Suit? Call for backup. You're outnumbered." Marcus tilted his head slightly, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Backup," he repeated, almost amused. "I got me backup." Before anyone could react, Marcus reached into his pocket, pulling out his badge and placing it on the table with a soft thud. The golden shield gleamed under the dim lights. The 3 bold letters, FBI, speaking volumes. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their bravado faltering. But Marcus wasn't finished. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper that only the bikers could hear. "You've just assaulted a federal agent," he said, his words like ice. "And that was your second mistake." Duke's confidence crumbled. He took a step back, his mind racing. But before he could make a move, Marcus added, "The first mistake, thinking I'm someone you can intimidate." The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken threats. The bikers were frozen, caught between their instinct to fight and the dawning realization that they had severely underestimated their target. Marcus didn't give them time to decide. He turned to the diner's stunned patrons and said, "You might want to leave. Things are about to get messy." As the customers hurried out, the bikers found themselves alone with Marcus. The calm, composed man they had mocked moments ago was gone, replaced by someone far more dangerous. And though they didn't know it yet, their lives were about to change forever. The diner door creaked shut behind the last of the patrons, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The bikers stood frozen, their confidence eroding as Marcus remained calm and unshaken. There was something unnerving about the way he carried himself, an unspoken authority that made even the most hardened outlaw hesitate. Duke was the first to break the silence, trying to reclaim control of the situation. "FBI badge or not, you're still just one man," he spat, but there was a noticeable edge of doubt in his voice. "What are you gonna do? Arrest us all by yourself?" Marcus didn't respond right away. Instead, he glanced at the clock on the diner wall, as if calculating something. His silence only fueled the tension. Finally he spoke, his voice calm but deliberate. "You think being in a group makes you untouchable. That fear is enough to protect you. But fear works both ways, doesn't it?" There was something in his tone, a subtle warning, a quiet assurance that he wasn't bluffing. It sent a ripple of unease through the group. Duke clenched his fists, trying to suppress the creeping dread. "We don't scare easy," he said, though the words lacked the conviction they once carried. Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if studying them. "You should," he replied simply. The room seemed to shrink as the bikers realized the man standing before them wasn't just another bureaucrat hiding behind a badge. There was a sharpness in his gaze, a sense of control that suggested he'd seen worse than them and come out on top. It was the kind of confidence that couldn't be faked. One of the younger bikers, a wiry man with a snake tattoo curling around his neck, tried to lighten the mood. "Come on, Duke, he's just one guy. Let's show him what happens when suits try to act tough." He reached for a weapon tucked into his belt, but Marcus' hand moved faster. With a single fluid motion, Marcus disarmed him, the knife clattering to the floor. The room went deadly silent again. The young biker stumbled back, clutching his wrist in pain, his bravado shattered. Marcus didn't say a word, his expression unreadable. It was as if he'd been waiting for someone to test him, and now that they had, the balance of power in the room had shifted entirely. Duke's jaw tightened as he tried to rally his men. "Don't let him mess with your head," he barked. "He's just trying to scare us." "I don't mean to scare you," Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "But I do need you to understand something. I've spent years dealing with men who think they're above the law, men who think rules don't apply to them, and every single one of them learned the hard way that they were wrong." Duke stepped forward, his anger bubbling to the surface. "You think you're some kind of hero. You think flashing that badge makes you untouchable. Let me tell you something, Suit. Out here, we make our own rules. Your fancy FBI training doesn't mean a damn thing." Marcus didn't back down. If anything, Duke's outbursts seemed to amuse him. "You're right," he said, surprising everyone. "Out here, the rules are different. But that just means I have to play by them too. And trust me, you don't want that." For a moment, the bikers exchanged uncertain glances. Something about Marcus's calm demeanor, his lack of fear, was starting to unnerve them. They were used to people cowering, pleading, or running. But this man didn't flinch. He didn't beg. He didn't run. It was as if he knew something they didn't, and that unknown was more terrifying than any threat. Duke tried to brush it off, turning his attention to the rest of his crew. "We don't have time for this," he said gruffly. "Let's grab what we came for and get out of here." But Marcus's voice stopped him in his tracks. "You think this is about a little power trip in a diner?" he asked, his tone laced with quiet menace. "You think you can walk away from this like it never happened?" Duke turned back, his patience wearing thin. "What's your game, huh? You're alone. No backup, no weapon, just a badge and a big mouth. What do you really think you can do here?" Marcus stepped closer, closing the distance between them. Despite being surrounded, he didn't seem the least bit intimidated. "You're right about one thing," he said. "I don't have backup. I don't need it. But you're not as untouchable as you think. And when this is over, you'll wish you walked away when you had the chance." Duke's face twisted in anger, but before he could respond, the faint sound of sirens echoed in the distance. The bikers stiffened, their bravado faltering as they realized what was happening. Marcus glanced toward the window, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. 3 minutes, he said, his words heavy with meaning. That's all it took. Panic rippled through the group. Duke turned to his men, barking orders. "We're not sticking around for this. Move." But as they scrambled to leave, they found themselves boxed in. Outside, unmarked vehicles screeched to a halt, and heavily armed agents poured out, surrounding the diner. The bikers' escape routes were cut off, their once bold confidence replaced by the cold reality of the situation. They weren't in control anymore. Inside, Marcus stood still, his expression calm and unreadable as chaos erupted around him. He didn't need to say anything more. His actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. The bikers froze in place as the realization set in. They were trapped. The sirens outside weren't just noise. They were a warning that their reign over this small patch of lawlessness was coming to an end. Some of the younger bikers looked toward Duke for direction, their earlier arrogance replaced with uncertainty. But Duke's face was a mask of anger and defiance. He wasn't a man who surrendered easily, and he certainly wasn't going to let one man in a suit undo years of fear and control. Marcus remained calm, standing in the same spot he had been since the confrontation began. He didn't move, didn't flinch, as the tension in the room reached its breaking point. His eyes locked on Duke, as if daring him to make the next move. The seconds stretched out, heavy with unspoken challenges. The air in the diner felt thick, charged with the kind of energy that meant something big was about to happen. Outside, the agents were moving with precision, their voices cutting through the air as they coordinated their positions. The sound of boots hitting pavement and commands being issued echoed in the stillness, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing inside. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence crumbling as they realized just how serious the situation had become. One of the bikers, a man named Rocco, who had always been Duke's right-hand man, stepped forward. His face was hard, but his voice betrayed a trace of hesitation. "Duke, we gotta get out of here," he said, his tone low. "This ain't worth it. We can regroup, figure out what's next." Duke shot him a glare that could have cut steel. "You think we're just gonna roll over? Let them win," he snarled. "We've been through worse than this. They don't scare me." But even as he spoke, it was clear that Duke was trying to convince himself as much as his crew. The reality of their situation was setting in, and for the first time, the cracks in his facade were beginning to show. Marcus watched it all unfold, his silence more powerful than any words he could have spoken. "Listen to him," Marcus finally said, his voice steady but firm. "You're outnumbered, outmaneuvered. The smart thing to do is to stand down. Fighting back won't end the way you think it will." Duke turned on Marcus, his anger flaring. "You think you've got all the answers, don't you?" he spat. "You think you can just walk in here, flash that badge, and make us crawl?" He gestured to his crew, trying to rally them. "We don't bow to anyone, especially not some suit who thinks he's better than us." But the words didn't land the way Duke intended. The bikers hesitated, their earlier unity starting to fracture. Rocco looked around, reading the room, and saw what Duke refused to admit. Their time was running out. The agents outside weren't going to wait forever, and the longer they delayed, the worse it would get. Meanwhile, Marcus stayed perfectly still, his gaze unwavering. He knew better than to push too hard. People like Duke thrived on defiance, on the belief that they were invincible. But the cracks were already there. All Marcus had to do was wait for the pressure to do the rest. Outside, Agent Ramirez, one of Marcus' colleagues, was coordinating the team. She was sharp, methodical, and had worked alongside Marcus for years. She trusted his instincts, but that didn't mean she wasn't concerned. Through her radio, she spoke to the team. "Hold your positions. Marcus knows what he's doing, but stay ready. These guys are unpredictable." Inside, the tension hit a breaking point when another biker, a younger man named Billy, finally cracked under the pressure. "Duke, man, this is crazy," he said, his voice shaking. "We're not gonna win this. Let's just get up. I didn't sign up to go to prison, or worse." Duke turned on him with a snarl, grabbing him by the collar. "You shut your mouth," he growled. "You knew what you were getting into when you joined us. You think they'll let us walk away if we just give up? They'll lock us up and throw away the key. Is that what you want?" Billy shook his head, fear in his eyes, but he didn't answer. Duke released him with a shove, turning back to Marcus. "This is on you," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you've won, but you don't know who you're messing with." Marcus didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked around the room, his gaze falling on each of the bikers in turn. "You've got a choice to make," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "You can follow Duke and go down with him, or you can walk out of here and take the chance to start over. But you can't do both." The room was silent as the weight of Marcus' words hung in the air. For a moment, it seemed like no one would move. But then slowly, one of the bikers stepped back. It was Rocco. He held up his hands, a look of resignation on his face. "I'm done," he said, his voice steady. "This ain't worth it." Duke stared at him in disbelief, anger and betrayal flashing in his eyes. "You're turning your back on me," he demanded, "after everything we've been through." Rocco met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm not turning my back," he said. "I'm just not going down for this. You can keep fighting if you want, but I'm out." The tension in the room shifted again as more of the bikers began to follow Rocco's lead. One by one, they stepped back, their loyalty to Duke outweighed by their desire to survive. Duke stood alone, his fury boiling over as he realized he'd lost control. Outside, Agent Ramirez watched as some of the bikers began to emerge from the diner, their hands raised in surrender. She gave the signal, and the agents moved in swiftly, taking them into custody without incident. But her focus remained on the diner, where Duke and Marcus were still inside. Back in the diner, Marcus took a step closer to Duke, his voice calm but unyielding. "It's over," he said. "You got nothing left to fight for. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Duke glared at him, his fists clenched at his sides. For a moment, it seemed like he might lash out, but then something in his eyes shifted. The defiance gave way to something else: defeat. Slowly, he lowered his hands, his shoulders slumping as the weight of his choices finally caught up to him. The sound of the diner door opening broke the silence as the agents entered, their weapons drawn but their movements cautious. Marcus stepped back, giving them room as they moved to take Duke into custody. He didn't resist, his earlier bravado gone, replaced by a quiet resignation. As Duke was led out, Marcus stood alone in the empty diner, the echoes of the confrontation still lingering in the air. He took a deep breath, his expression unreadable, before stepping outside to rejoin his team. The night wasn't over yet, and there was still work to be done. As the agents escorted Duke out of the diner, Marcus stepped into the cool night air. The parking lot was flooded with the harsh glare of headlights, the hum of engines, and the crackle of radios. The bikers who had surrendered were being processed one by one, their bravado extinguished under the weight of impending consequences. But Marcus's focus wasn't on the scene unfolding around him. He sensed something was off, a lingering tension that hadn't dissipated despite Duke's capture. Agent Ramirez approached him, her brow furrowed. "You got it?" she asked, her tone professional but laced with concern. She'd seen Marcus in high-stress situations before, but tonight felt different. There was an edge to him that even she couldn't quite place. Marcus gave a curt nod. "For now," he replied, though his gaze remained fixed on the diner. Something about the way Duke had surrendered didn't sit right with him. It had been too easy. A man like Duke didn't just give up, not without a plan brewing in the back of his mind. And then there was the matter of the missing members. Not all the bikers were accounted for, and Marcus knew better than to believe they'd simply decided to stay home. Ramirez followed his gaze, her expression darkening. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking this isn't over," Marcus said quietly. "Duke might be in cuffs, but we're not out of the woods yet. He's too smart to have been caught without a backup plan." As if on cue, a commotion broke out near one of the patrol cars. One of the younger agents shouted, and Marcus turned to see Duke grinning as he was shoved into the backseat. It wasn't the grin of a man defeated. It was the grin of someone who knew something they didn't. The sight of it sent a chill down Marcus's spine. "Check the perimeter," Marcus ordered, his voice sharp. "Now." Ramirez didn't hesitate. She barked orders into her radio, and agents began spreading out, their weapons drawn as they swept the area. The tension in the air thickened, the sense of unease spreading like wildfire. Marcus stayed where he was, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. His instincts were rarely wrong, and tonight they were screaming at him to stay alert. Minutes ticked by, each one heavier than the last. The quiet of the night was broken only by the occasional crackle of the radio and the distant murmur of the agents' voices. But then, just as the tension seemed to reach its breaking point, there was a sudden explosion of sound, gunshots, sharp and jarring, coming from the far side of the lot. Marcus was already moving before the echo faded. He sprinted toward the source of the noise, his heart pounding as he rounded the corner of the diner. What he saw made his stomach drop. A group of bikers, those who had been unaccounted for, had ambushed the perimeter team. They were armed and clearly prepared, using the element of surprise to their advantage. Chaos erupted as agents returned fire, their movements precise but frantic. Marcus ducked behind a parked car, his mind racing. This wasn't just an escape attempt. This was a coordinated effort, and had been planned long before Duke had walked into the diner. The realization hit him like a freight train. Duke had been the bait, a distraction to draw their attention while the rest of the gang prepared to strike. Through the chaos, Marcus caught sight of Duke in the back of the patrol car. The grin was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. He wasn't panicked or afraid. He was waiting, watching, as if this was all part of his plan. Marcus clenched his jaw. He couldn't let them win, not now. "Ramirez," he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "Fall back and regroup. We need to contain this." Ramirez was already moving, directing agents to secure a defensive position. But the bikers were relentless, their attack coordinated and brutal. They moved with the precision of people who knew the terrain, using the cover of darkness to their advantage. Marcus could see the determination in their movements. They weren't just trying to free Duke, they were sending a message. As Marcus maneuvered through the chaos, his mind raced with possibilities. How had they known the FBI would be here? Who had tipped them off? And what was Duke's ultimate goal? The pieces didn't add up, and the more Marcus thought about it, the more he realized they were playing right into Duke's hands. He reached Ramirez, who was crushed behind a truck, issuing orders into her radio. "We're pinned down," she said, her tone grim. "These guys came prepared." Marcus nodded, his expression hard. "We need to cut them off before they regroup. Duke's using this as a diversion. There's more to this than just an escape." Ramirez glanced at him, her eyes narrowing. "You think this is bigger than Duke?" "I know it is," Marcus replied. "We need to end this now." But even as he spoke, the sound of a motorcycle engine roared to life. Marcus turned just in time to see one of the bikers breaking through the defensive line, heading straight for the patrol car where Duke was being held. The biker swerved sharply, skidding to a stop as another emerged from the shadows, covering him with a rifle. Marcus didn't hesitate. He broke into a sprint, weaving through the chaos as he closed the distance. His pulse pounded in his ears, his focus narrowing to the scene unfolding before him. The biker with the rifle was shouting orders, forcing the agents to back off as he approached the car. Duke was grinning again, his hands still cuffed but his confidence restored. He leaned forward, saying something to the biker through the window. Whatever it was, it made the man laugh, a harsh, guttural sound that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. But Marcus wasn't about to let them get away. He pushed himself harder, his muscles burning as he closed the gap. The biker with the rifle turned, his eyes widening in surprise as he spotted Marcus. He raised his weapon, but Marcus was faster. In a single fluid motion, he tackled the man to the ground, the rifle skidding out of reach. The other biker hesitated, torn between helping his partner and freeing Duke. It was the opening Marcus needed. He grabbed the rifle, leveling it at the second biker. "Don't move," he barked, his voice sharp and commanding. For a moment, everything froze. The chaos, the noise, the violence. It all seemed to pause as Marcus stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. Duke was in the back seat, his hands still cuffed, but his expression was triumphant. Whatever he was planning, it wasn't over yet. Marcus kept the rifle steady, his eyes locked on the second biker. The man hesitated, one hand hovering over the handlebars of his motorcycle, the other twitching as though debating whether to go for a concealed weapon. The tension in the air was suffocating, every second dragging out like an eternity. But it wasn't just the immediate standoff that gnawed at Marcus. It was Duke. Even behind the glass and steel of the patrol car, the man carried an air of control, his grin a silent reminder that he was always one step ahead. Then it happened. A sudden sharp screech of tires from the far end of the lot broke the fragile silence. Marcus's gaze flicked toward the noise, just in time to see a black van speeding toward them, its headlights slicing through the chaos. The van barreled past the agent's defensive line, its reinforced front smashing through a hastily erected barricade. It didn't slow down as it approached the patrol car, and Marcus realized with dawning horror what was about to happen. "Get down!" Marcus roared, diving to the ground just as the van skidded to a halt. The back doors flew open, and two more bikers jumped out, armed and clearly ready for a fight. They moved with precision, one of them tossing a smoke grenade toward the agents while the other sprinted toward the patrol car. The grenade exploded in a plume of thick, choking smoke, obscuring the scene and plunging the lot into chaos once again. Marcus scrambled to his feet, coughing as the acrid smoke filled his lungs. He could hear shouts and the scuffle of feet as agents tried to regroup, but the bikers had the advantage. Through the haze, Marcus spotted the biker he'd disarmed moments ago making a break for the van, his partner close behind. And in the middle of it all, Duke was being hauled out of the patrol car, his cuffs still on but his confidence unshaken. "Ramirez!" Marcus shouted, his voice cutting through the confusion. "They're extracting him. We need backup now." But Ramirez was nowhere to be seen, her last position lost in the swirling smoke. Marcus's mind raced. He couldn't wait for backup, not with the bikers already halfway to freedom. He surged forward, dodging shadows and shapes as he closed in on the van. He could hear Duke shouting orders, his voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the chaos like a blade. This wasn't just an escape, it was a statement. As Marcus reached the side of the van, he grabbed onto the open door, yanking one of the bikers backward before they could climb in. The man snarled, swinging wildly, but Marcus ducked under the blow and drove his shoulder into the biker's chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. The other biker turned, raising a weapon, but Marcus was faster, slamming the door into the man's arm and causing him to drop the gun. Duke, now half inside the van, turned to look at Marcus. For the first time, his grin faltered. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" Duke sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Not when it comes to people like you." Marcus shot back, his tone cold. He lunged toward Duke, grabbing for the man's arm, but before he could pull him out, the van's engine roared to life. The driver slammed on the gas, and the van lurched forward, dragging Marcus along with it. The world blurred around him as he clung to the door, the wind whipping against his face. He could hear the bikers shouting inside, their panic mingling with Duke's cold laughter. Marcus's grip slipped, his fingers screaming in protest, but he held on, refusing to let them get away. He reached for his radio, fumbling to call for backup, but the van swerved violently, slamming him against the side and sending the device clattering to the pavement. Inside the van, Duke leaned out, his face inches from Marcus's. "You're out of your league, Agent," he taunted. "This isn't just about me. You're playing a game you don't even understand." The words sent a chill down Marcus's spine, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he focused on pulling himself closer, his hand inching toward the open door. "You talk too much," Marcus growled, his tone steady despite the chaos. But before he could make his move, a sudden, deafening explosion rocked the night. The van swerved wildly, the driver struggling to regain control as flames erupted from the far side of the lot. Marcus glanced back, his heart sinking as he saw the source of the blast. One of the agent's vehicles had been hit, whether by accident or design, he couldn't tell. The lot was now a war zone, the bikers' plan spiraling into something far more dangerous than a simple extraction. Marcus used the distraction to his advantage, pulling himself inside the van and grappling with Duke. The confined space made it difficult to move, but Marcus didn't care. He was running on pure adrenaline now, his focus narrowed to one goal: stopping Duke. The two men struggled, their movements a chaotic tangle as the van careened through the streets. Duke fought like a man who had everything to lose, his blows fast and brutal. But Marcus had the upper hand, his training and determination driving him forward. He managed to pin Duke against the side of the van, his grip like iron as he forced the man down. "You're done," Marcus hissed, his voice low and dangerous. But Duke only laughed, a sound that sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. "You still don't get it, do you?" Duke said, his tone mocking. "This isn't about me. It's about what comes next." Before Marcus could process the words, the van screeched to a halt, throwing him forward. The door behind him flew open, and a pair of hands yanked him out, slamming him onto the pavement. Marcus gasped as the air was knocked out of him, his vision swimming as he tried to get his bearings. Standing over him was another biker, his face obscured by a mask, but his stance radiating authority. The man reached down, grabbing Marcus by the collar and pulling him to his feet. "You've made a mistake, Agent," the biker said, his voice low and menacing. "You've got no idea who you're dealing with." Marcus didn't respond, his mind racing as he struggled to find a way out. The biker's grip was unrelenting, and he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. But even as his options dwindled, Marcus refused to give up. He'd come too far to let them win now. As the van's engine roared to life again and the bikers prepared to make their escape, Marcus knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a fight for Duke. It was a battle against something far bigger, a threat that extended well beyond the chaos of tonight. And no matter how high the stakes rose, he wasn't going to back down. As the masked biker dragged Marcus toward the edge of the parking lot, the agent's mind raced, calculating his next move. His breath was ragged, his body battered, but his resolve remained unshaken. He caught glimpses of the other bikers scrambling to regroup, their earlier confidence now tinged with panic. Whatever their grand plan had been, it was unraveling fast, and Marcus intended to be the one who pulled the final thread. The biker holding him leaned in close, his voice low and dripping with menace. "You should have stayed out of this. Now you're just another loose end." Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he let his body slacken, feigning defeat. The biker relaxed his grip slightly, just enough for Marcus to act. With a sudden twist, Marcus broke free, using the momentum to drive his elbow into the man's ribs. The biker staggered back, clutching his side, and Marcus didn't waste a second. He lunged forward, tacking the man to the ground and pinning him there. Before Marcus could deliver a final blow, the roar of the van's engine drew his attention. Duke was in the passenger seat now, barking orders at the driver as the vehicle sped toward the exit. Marcus cursed under his breath. If they got away, this entire operation would have been for nothing. He grabbed the biker's discarded weapon and sprinted toward the van, his legs burning with effort. The van swerved sharply as the driver tried to shake him off, but Marcus was relentless. He fired a warning shot, shattering the rear window and sending shards of glass raining down inside. The van skidded to a stop, the driver clearly rattled. Marcus closed the distance, his heart pounding as he reached the door and yanked it open. Inside, Duke stared at him with a mixture of rage and something else, something that looked almost like respect. "You just don't quit, do you?" Duke muttered, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Not when people like you are out there." Marcus shot back. He leveled the weapon at Duke, his finger hovering over the trigger. "It's over. Get out." But Duke didn't move. Instead, he smiled, a cold, calculating expression that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. "You think this ends with me," Duke said, his tone almost amused. "You're in over your head, Agent. You don't even know what you've stumbled into." Before Marcus could respond, Duke reached into his jacket. Marcus tensed, ready to fire, but instead of a weapon, Duke pulled out a small device, no larger than a cell phone. He held it up, his thumb hovering over a single button. "You've got two choices," Duke said. "You arrest me, and we both go down. Or you let me walk away and maybe, just maybe, you'll live to fight another day." Marcus's mind raced. The device in Duke's hand was clearly a detonator, and judging by the faint beeping coming from somewhere in the van, Duke's smile faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough. Marcus lunged forward, grabbing the device and wresting it from Duke's hand. The van lurched as the driver tried to intervene, but Marcus was faster. He slammed the device against the dashboard, smashing it to pieces. The beeping stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. Then Duke laughed, a low, bitter sound that echoed in the confined space of the van. "You really don't get it, do you?" he said. "This was never about me." Before Marcus could press in further, the sound of sirens filled the air. Reinforcements had arrived, and the bikers were scattering, their carefully laid plans crumbling under the weight of the FBI's response. Ramirez appeared out of the smoke, her weapon drawn, and together, she and Marcus pulled Duke and the driver from the van, placing them in cuffs. As the chaos settled, Marcus allowed himself a moment of relief. The bikers had been stopped, Duke was in custody, and whatever disaster they'd planned had been averted. But something about Duke's final words nagged at him, a lingering thread of unease that refused to be silenced. Hours later, back at headquarters, Marcus sat in a briefing room, replaying the events in his mind. Ramirez entered, a file in hand and a grim expression on her face. "We found something during the sweep," she said, placing the file on the table. "It's bigger than we thought." Marcus opened the file, his eyes scanning the documents inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. Schematics, financial records, coded messages. It was all there, a sprawling web of conspiracy that stretched far beyond Duke and his gang. This wasn't just a biker gang gone rogue. It was something far more dangerous, something that threatened to upend everything Marcus thought he knew. As he closed the file, Marcus felt a familiar resolve settle over him. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Duke had been right about one thing. This was bigger than him. But Marcus wasn't about to back down. He faced impossible odds before, and he'd do it again. Because that's what he did. That's who he was.